The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Arhat, the fully enlightened one. Today I'm going to be talking about a sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya, and it's entitled The People of the Bamboo Gate, a teaching applicable to oneself. So just give a bit of a setting for this sutta. So the Buddha is walking on tour among the Kosalans together with a number of monks, and he comes to the Brahmin village of the Kosalans. Okay? The people living there had heard a good report about the Buddha, saying that the Buddha teaches the Dharma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, with right meaning and phrasing. This meeting with the people of the Bamboo Gate, so that's actually what they're specifically called, the village that they lived in, the Bamboo Gate, I bet it was a relief for the Buddha. You know, here he'd come across an audience who viewed him as a good and legitimate Dharma teacher. Although the Buddha was always up for the challenge, it seems, I imagine that it was very pleasant to have an audience that wasn't hostile from the onset, you know, who really greeted him and wanted to see him. So the people of the Bamboo Gate paid their respects to the Buddha, and then they said, Master Gautama, we have such wishes, desires, and hopes as these. May we dwell in a home crowded with children. So remember, at this time in the history, there were only 100 million people on the earth, not the 6 billion plus that there are today. So to have a wish to dwell in a home crowded with children is pretty common. May we enjoy Canon sandalwoods. That must have been some special kind of sandalwood. May we wear garlands, scents, and unguents. Unguents are ointments, if you don't know. May we receive gold and silver. With the breakup of the body after death, may we be reborn in a good destination in a heavenly world. As we have such wishes, desires, and hopes, let the Master Gautama teach us the Dharma in such a way that we might dwell in a home crowded with children, that we may have Canon sandalwood, garlands, scents, unguents, gold and silver. With the break up the body after death, may we be reborn in a good destination, a heavenly world. So that's a pretty big order that they're asking the Buddha, you know, to have all these children and all these possessions and to go to a heavenly world after they've left this earth. It's kind of a, you know, having your cake and eating it too thing. But remember, these people were not the Buddha's disciples, at least not yet. Okay, so like the Kalama Sutta and the people that the Buddha has the exchange with there, they weren't disciples of the Buddha at this point. And this would be just very common desires and attitudes about what would make one happy and peaceful in life. If you really look at this, though, I think what you see is what these people are looking for is a happy, prosperous, and peaceful life, which, of course, is what we all want. So you can kind of get beyond the garlands and the unguents and all that and just see that they're looking for a happy, prosperous, and peaceful life, which, of course, is what all beings want. And so the Buddha responds here, and it's very interesting, his response. He doesn't say anything about gold and silver, heaven, unguents, anything like that. But he kind of goes right to the heart of the matter. He must have sensed that these people were ripe for a teaching on a deeper level. So he gives this teaching of conduct that helps everyone, including oneself. The Buddha begins by saying, I will teach you, householders, a Dhamma exposition applicable to oneself. So there's a footnote here in the translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It says, having related it to oneself, it is to be applied to others. What is displeasing and disagreeable to me is displeasing and disagreeable to the others too. I think on the first night I tried to explain a little bit about the adage in this sutta, but I was fairly confused in my explaining. So I hope this whole explanation helps better with that. When I was a young boy, my father had been given a gift of this placard, which he put down in a den in our house, which actually ended up being my bedroom. Actually, there were four of us that lived in there, my other three brothers. But this placard that he was given, it had what I'm going to call the golden rule of religions. Okay, and on this placard there were different versions from different religions of do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. And it was, I thought it was wonderful, and it just, I think I saw a Buddhist version on there, okay, long ago. I know I saw one from Islam, obviously from Christianity, Judaism, but I could see that these were worded differently, but basically they were the same. This whole idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so in this sutta, the Buddha gives a Dhamma exposition applicable to oneself. He takes us through 7 reflections. Okay? So I'm going to just briefly go through these. So he says, what householders is the Dhamma applicable to oneself? Here I am one who wishes to live, who does not wish to die. I desire happiness and am adverse to suffering. Since I am one who wishes this, if someone were to take my life, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to take the life of another, of one who wishes to live, who does not wish to die, who desires happiness and is averse to suffering, that would not be agreeable to the other either. What is displeasing and disagreeable to me is displeasing and disagreeable to the other too. How can I inflict upon another what is displeasing and disagreeable to me? Having reflected thus, he himself abstains from the destruction of life, exhorts others to abstain from the destruction of life, and speaks in praise of abstinence from the destruction of life. Thus the bodily conduct of his is purified in 3 ways. So, this is pretty much common sense. We all know this, and I'm not sure who said this. It was either Mark Twain or Yogi Berra, but they said the difficulty with common sense is that it isn't all that common. Or, these very simple teachings, simple teaching, but we don't really take them up, and practice them because they're just simple teachings. Anybody could do them. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a brief version of the rest of these points the Buddha made. And in many ways, as I go through them, you will see that these wholesome courses of action relate to our precepts, our Buddhist precepts. So number 2 is, if someone were to take from me what I have not given, that is, to commit theft, that would be not pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to take from another what is not given, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. 3, if someone were to commit adultery with my wives, remember this is 2,500 years ago in India, and the Bamboo Grove is a Brahmin village. So multiple wives were what was done. Okay? So if someone were to commit adultery with my wives, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to commit adultery with wives of another, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. If someone were to damage my welfare with false speech, this is number 4, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to damage the welfare of another with false speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. 5. If someone were to divide me from my friends by divisive speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to divide another from his friends by divisive speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. Number 6, if someone were to address me with harsh speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to address another with harsh speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. And 7, if someone were to address me with frivolous speech and idle chatter, so that's inappropriate, silly speech and speech lacking basis in fact, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to address another with frivolous speech and idle chatter, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. What is pleasing and disagreeable to me is pleasing and disagreeable to the other too. Did I read that right? Yeah. How can I inflict upon another what is displeasing and disagreeable to me? So these 7 courses of wholesome action, they're not rocket science. And yet, if we're honest with ourselves, when the flames of greed, hate, and delusion blaze up in our minds, when we have difficulties, we can lose sight of the golden rule to treat others as we wish to be treated ourselves. If we just took a moment to reflect before reacting, we will cause less harm to ourselves and others. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, the mind hard to control, flighty, alighting where it wishes. One does well to tame. The disciplined mind brings happiness. So the people of the Bamboo Gate were looking for the key to happiness. They were looking for the key to a peaceful life. And the Buddha gave them that. So in the Metta Sutta, the Buddha said, no one should deceive another or despise another anywhere because of anger and thoughts of aversion. No one should wish suffering upon another, just as a mother would protect her son, her only son, with her own life. So one should develop towards all beings a state of mind without boundaries. And towards the whole world one should develop loving kindness, a state of mind without boundaries, above, below, and across, unconfined, without enmity, without adversaries. That's not so easy to do, but I think it's doable. Okay? At the beginning of the sutta, the people of the Bamboo Gate were not the Buddha's disciples. They just had a very favorable attitude towards him, which, of course, as I say, was a nice break for the Buddha. By the end of the sutta, seeing the clear wisdom of the Buddha's teachings, the people of the Bamboo Gate took refuge in the 3 treasures and asked the Buddha to remember them as lay followers who had gone forth for refuge for life. So their simplistic, materialistic, in many ways selfish notion of what brings happiness and peace had been expanded to a worldview for the welfare of others. And in this teaching that the Buddha gave, he makes no mention of sandalwood, garlands, scents, ointments, gold, or silver. The Buddha's teaching here is all about how we treat each other. So we were talking yesterday in our discussion about sometimes we're in a situation where the other party is pushy, maybe about their beliefs, or they're just pushy, or maybe even disrespectful about what we hold dear. So should we be pushy and disrespectful in return? I don't think that helps. It doesn't help us. It doesn't help the other person. In situations like this, sometimes the best course of action is to politely excuse ourselves from the conversation. And as someone in the discussion said yesterday, we don't have to accept what the other person is saying, but we still need to respect them. Reverend Master Jiyu loved the Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler. I think I slightly quoted it yesterday. I don't know how accurate it was. But I looked on the internet, and of course you can get songs and lyrics now for about everything. So in that song, it says you got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, know when to run. You never count your money when you're sitting at the table. There'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. Okay, that's advice from a gambler to another gambler, a would-be gambler. There's some good advice for life in there. You know, I mean, sometimes we stay in a situation, we endure. Sometimes we get out, and occasionally we run when we get out. Okay. So it's interesting in this song, before these lines of advice from the gambler, it kind of takes us through a conversation that this would-be gambler and the gambler have. And the gambler says to the would-be gambler, he says, "Son, I've made a life of reading people's faces and knowing what the cards were by the way they held their eyes." Well, that's not quite what we do in our practice. We don't stare people in the face or check out their eyes all the time. In our meditation practice, we take a bit of a different approach. Although we look outward with eyes open when we meditate, we reflect within and look upon ourselves, on our own minds. That's something that we can do something about, our own minds. We can tame and train the mind. Above all, we can sit still within its activity so that strong emotions and strong views need not no longer push us around. In everyday life, sometimes there are uncomfortable situations, awkward conversations, excuse me, and sometimes unpleasant people. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. I mean, sometimes we're on the side of being the real awkward one in the conversation, the real difficult one, and maybe the unpleasant one. But we all run across this. What we can do is not be that way ourselves. So the only job I ever got fired from in my life was a construction job. This is a couple years before I came to the Abbey, maybe a year. I was working outside of Portland in an area that was being developed, and I'd had some basic carpentry work I'd done for a while, but I was just more of a handy person than I was a carpenter. And the job I got was framing sidewalks and driveways and pathways in this housing development. The people that I was working with, a couple young guys and my boss, they were a lot stronger than me. Not that I was a weakling or anything, but they were stronger. They'd been doing this for a while. And obviously they were more experienced than me. And the pace of the work was incredibly fast because the more jobs completed, the more money they got. You completed one job, you went to the next contract, And so you were moving from the minute you started to the minute you ended. Okay. Well, I got fired. My boss called me up one night and he said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" He says, "You can't keep up." And I said, "I'm doing the best I can." And basically he said, "It's not good enough." And that was okay. I just had to face it. Quite honestly, it wasn't the most pleasant job in the world because it was kind of a hard-nosed attitude everybody had. And those people that I was working with, my boss and the younger people, they were all young. So who knows what they did with their life. Maybe they learned something. Okay. The difficulty is I didn't get paid. I waited a few days, maybe a week, and no check in the mail. So I called up my boss, because I had his phone number, and I said, I'd like to get my money. And he said, "Okay, come over to the house, this evening." And it was a weekday evening, and I drove over to his house. I went up to the door, I rang the doorbell, and his father answered. At least I'm presuming that this was his father. It looked like him, and it was an older gentleman. Well, he was loud, and he was stinking drunk. Okay, and he was kind of rough. Okay. I got my money. My boss came out and I think stepped in front of his father and gave me the money, and I said, "Thank you." I drove away. And my memory is I just didn't really get involved in the whole thing. I just had to get another job, which I did, and it worked out okay. Because actually I was earning money to pay off my loans so I could come to the Abbey. So I left, and I could feel compassion in myself rather than anger or frustration or righteousness, because of the whole scene I had just seen, and there was something going on there, and I just felt compassion for the people. Okay, and I credited that to my Buddhist practice, which I had taken up 6 to 8 months before that, and really was trying to do my meditation practice diligently, as well as come down to the Abbey every 6 months or so. Oh yeah, and when I talked to my boss about, he said, "What's wrong with you? You can't keep up." And I just said very straightforwardly, "How many people have you had before me doing the job?" And I think he said 6. And he was just running through people, and I don't know, maybe that happened again, or maybe it didn't. Maybe they found somebody who could do it. But I realized I just didn't have to get all upset. I just wanted my money because I was owed it, and I could feel compassion for these people. So at heart, everyone would like to be greeted and treated with kindness, compassion, patience, and generosity. And actually, unconditionally, we'd all like to be treated that way, not making exceptions. And as I say, sometimes we meet rough characters in life or difficult people. We don't have to accept them or what they're putting out, but we have to respect them. We can't cut them off. Okay, they have the Buddha nature. In the Dhammapada translation by Gil Fronsdale, the Buddha says, "Many do not realize that they must here die. For those who realize this, quarrels end." I'll read that again. "Many do not realize that we here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end." Because time is short, really. We don't know how much time we have. And so to try to do the best job of living in that place of meditation and trying to be kind to people and generous, even when we don't get that in return. In their heart of hearts, they'd really like that. And we don't do it because of that. We do it because it's the way to act. Fortunately, in Buddhism, we have the teaching of impermanence. And this directs us to the unconditioned, favorable conditions or not. The fact that life is impermanent. Okay, we got to make the best use of it we can. So may we reflect on these teachings of the Buddha that are applicable to oneself, put them into practice in our everyday life, and help ourselves and all beings cross over to the other shore. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the Scripture of great wisdom.